This video is part of our ongoing series on Python, Flask, WT-Forms. Our working example has been this five-guy uh, website, which allows a person to pick what kind of a burger, what level to be cooked at, what toppings, and do you or don't you want fries. And what we had done one of the last times is read one set of choices, the burgers, from a JSON file. And we've got the Python separated into two files here. One starting with the word forms, which is focusing on the WTF part and sort of extending the Flask form. And then a sort of a separate folder, a separate file, I should say, which is more of the Flask side, the routing. And previously, when we read the choices from JSON, we did that in this WTF side. And I have taken that out of here, and I'm going to try to do it over here in the app, in the route side. So let's just show that it is taken out here. Here is my I'm extending the Flask form to get my five-guy FG form. And here are the radio fields. And I'm only the JSON right now is just the burgers. So for the radio field, I have my label and then I have my choices. I was playing around with the validators. I'm not going to need the validator because I'm going to make one of the choices the default, and then once something's chosen from a set of radio buttons, then there's always one thing chosen, and there's really no validation issues. And I did do that class no bullets thing. Okay, but so here's the thing. Over here in the WT forms, the choices are just an empty list, and we're going to get them from over here with the routes. So I'm going to get the choices from JSON, but I'm going to get them from a different file and a different part, sort of not over in the WTF Python file, but more in this routing file. I'm going to prepare. I have to I read the file, I have something in JSON format, and choices in WT forms is a list of tuples. So I need to get it into that form. And I'm going to use a list comprehension. Before I just used sort of old-fashioned for loop. And this time I'm going to use a list comprehension. So that'll squeeze that method down into sort of like a one-liner. I'm going to not only set the choices, but I'm going to set a default and change a default over here on this sort of more routing Python. And I'm going to need the dot process method. So I can just add choices and that will occur. But if I want to add or change a default, I'm going to need this dot process method. I'll liken it to a commit. Like you have all the code to do it, but it doesn't do it unless you commit. And then another thing, because one is because I don't know how to fix it, but also one just because of, again, where we are adding and changing the choices. I was working with valid on submit, and I'm going to go back to the easier is submitted because my form was coming out as sort of almost never valid, some weird session-y error. So if you know what my weird session-y error is, please leave a comment. Okay. So here we go. Okay. So I showed you the forms. The big difference was the choices. Before I had read the JSON here and set those choices here. Now they're just an empty list, and I'm going to be reading here. I'm setting up the app. I'm going to direct myself to the file within this sort of the app, so I can just sort of direct myself to the file, the JSON file I'm going to read based on the sort of the file system of where I currently am, or I can do it more within the app. And since now I've moved over to the file that is sort of more app aware, I'm going to make that switch. That'll be another one of my switches. So I'm declaring the app stuff before I read the files, so then I can do that sort of other way of locating the file. So I'm bringing in JSON in the operating system. Here was the way I was doing it before when I was over in the WT forms, and this way would still work here. Just sort of working with the operating system and getting the path and the directory name and changing it and going to static, okay. And then reading and parsing the JSON. This is just a more Flask way of locating the file, app.static_folder. It's a standard folder when working with Flask. And then there's a data subfolder, and 5guys_JSON is the file within the data subfolder of the standard static folder. So just a different way of locating it, and then reading it and parsing it as JSON. This big long ass comment was my approach to get the JSON file information. Let's have a peek at what that looks like. It's a dictionary with a property, a key burgers, which is then a list of smaller dictionaries which have two key value pairs, name and price. And I was getting that into the format that I want to make it a choice, to make it choices, and that is a list of tuples. So that is now just this one line. No, a list comprehension is the name of this thing. Okay, so I have the yellow square brackets are then I'm creating a list. I have the sort of the thing I want, and then the for loop. So when you're writing a for loop, you start with the for loop, but the list comprehension sort of reverses that order. So what do I want? I want a tuple. So overall I'm making a list. That's my yellow, but what do I want each item in my list to be? I want it to be a tuple. So my purple parentheses. It's going to be two things in the tuple. One of them is the name and a vertical bar and then the price. That's what I want to work with behind the scenes, so I know the name of the burger and the price of the burger. And so this first part here up to that comma, that is giving me the name and vertical bar and the price concatenated together with the vertical bar delimiter. And okay, and X is defined over here. So I'm sort of using X before I define it, but X is just the dummy name of the element in my list here. The second item in my tuple is just the name. And then I believe I printed that out. Here it is. So I am getting the right form, a list of tuples. And the first item in the tuple is the name, vertical bar, price, and the second is just the name. So list comprehension, get that down to one line. Okay. Standard stuff, the secret key, default route, redirected to the form handler route. Here is now my form handler route. I'm going to be working with post. I go over to forms and get my 5guys_form. And then I am going to get the burger choices. So form.burger.choices equals burger choices. So burger_choices is what I just wrote above, reading the JSON, doing the list comprehension, and form.burger.choices was here. My form, burger choices. I'm setting the choices they were an empty list. Now they are not. I want to set the first thing to be the sort of selected one. I want to sort of pre-select. So I want to get, I don't want to just sort of hard code it. I want to say I want the first item that I have in my list of choices to be the chosen one. And so I'm saying first is burger underscore choices 0. That is the tuple. And then first square bracket 0 is the first component in the tuple. So this first is the tuple hamburger vertical bar 619, and then also hamburger, and then first square bracket 0 will just be the hamburger square bracket 619. And I set the default to be the value, to be the first component of the tuple. Okay, so I'm setting a default. I've also decided to change the default of the level, I don't know, just to show that I can. So my level, I set a default and I set it to medium. And now I've decided to change that default to well. And to do these default things, I needed to process the form. Okay, the choices will work without going through the process, but the defaults will not. I also decided to add, not to set the topping choices, but to add to them. So I said form dot toppings dot choices dot append, and I added sort of just hard coded here a tuple of barbecue sauce as one of my toppings. So just I just want to play with working on this, adding choices, setting defaults, maybe adding choices, doing things like this over here in the route. Okay. I switched. I was working with form.validate on submit, but I switched back to the easier form is submitted because it kept coming all out as false. It works with the is submitted, but it was not completely proper validated. So I still have some things to work out, but so I switched over to is submitted, and I always sort of keep that here for this purpose of when it sort of confounds me, I switch back to is submitted. And then if it is submitted, then go to the handler. If it's not being submitted, then go to the form, and neither of those has changed from previous examples. So I've shown you what I want to show you. Just let me remind you of the changes. I am reading from JSON, but I switched where that JSON was. I have my two Python separated, my WT-Forms Python sort of separated from my more Flask routing Python. And I switched the reading of the JSON to the Flask, the route side. So I can, so I've switched where I'm getting JSON from. I switched turning the data into the proper form of a list of tuples into a list comprehension. So that was just a little wiser. I changed some, I've added and changed some defaults, and that needed for me to use this .process method. And then my valid on submit kept coming up as false, so I switched it back to the simpler is submitted. Okay, that's what I wanted to show you on this one. Thanks for your attention.